I didn't realize I had walked into my own execution until the restaurant door locked behind me. One moment, I was apologizing to the hostess for the inconvenience of returning so late. The next, I heard the soft click of the deadbolt, sharp and final, like the sound a coffin makes when it closes. "Mrs. Beaumont," the woman whispered, her voice shaking, "please don't panic, but you need to see something, and whatever you do, don't faint." Her name tag read Hannah Brooks. She looked too young to be this terrified. Her hands trembled as she gestured for me to follow her past the empty dining room, where candle stubs still smoked and the scent of expensive wine hung in the air. At least, I assumed it did. I couldn't smell anything anymore. That should have scared me more than it did. My phone lay forgotten on a counter beside a security monitor. I'd come back for it 20 minutes after leaving dinner with my son. I thought this would be a simple errand. Instead, Hannah pulled up a video. "I could lose my job for this," she said, swallowing hard. "But I can't pretend I didn't see it." The screen flickered to life. Table 12. My table. There I was, elegant as ever, silver hair pinned perfectly, pearl earrings catching the light. Across from me sat Daniel Beaumont, my only child, smiling politely, playing the role of the devoted son. Beside him, his wife, Clara, leaned in close, fingers wrapped possessively around her wine glass. I watched myself stand up and excuse myself. To the restroom, I remembered. The dizziness had come suddenly. It always did. The moment my back turned, my son moved. Not hesitantly, not nervously. Precisely. He reached into his jacket and removed a small vial, clear and unmarked. With practiced ease, he uncapped it and poured the liquid into my wine glass. Clara shifted in her chair, blocking the camera's view, her lips curling into a smile that made my stomach drop. When I returned to the table, I lifted the glass and drank. I grimaced. On the video, Daniel leaned back and mimicked my reaction. Exaggerated confusion, shaky hands, vacant eyes. Clara laughed. Soundless but unmistakable. The room spun. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor of the storage room. Hannah caught me just in time, her arms surprisingly strong. "I'm so sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry." For 6 months, my son had been poisoning me. 6 months of doctors telling me it was age. 6 months of losing my sense of taste, then smell, then balance. 6 months of being gently encouraged to rest, to step back, to sign documents that would hand over the company I'd built over 40 years. Beaumont Vineyards, valued at $120 million. I had believed him. Outside, the night air was cool. The gardens surrounding the restaurant were famous for their jasmine. People traveled miles just to walk among them. I smelled nothing. "You can't drive," Hannah said firmly. "You're not okay." I stared at my hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. "He thought I was dying," I said aloud, the words foreign and sharp. "He wanted me weak, confused." "And now?" she asked quietly. I looked toward the dark stretch of highway, toward the life I'd almost handed over without question. "The board meeting is Friday," I said. "That gives me 5 days." 5 days before Daniel would legally control everything. 5 days before my legacy would vanish. Hannah hesitated, then placed a hand on my arm. "Tell me what you need. I'll help." I didn't answer right away, because the truth was I didn't yet know how to stop my own son. I only knew this. Whatever illness I thought was destroying me wasn't natural. And if Daniel believed I was already finished, then I would let him keep believing it. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who thinks you're powerless is let them underestimate you. But that night, alone in my private laboratory, I discovered exactly how my son had been poisoning me. and why stopping him would require something far more dangerous than confrontation. I didn't go home that night. Not at first. Instead, I drove past the familiar gates of Beaumont Estate and continued down the narrow vineyard road until the old carriage house came into view. The headlights swept across stone walls my father had reinforced decades ago, back when this place was more dream than empire. Inside that carriage house was the one room Daniel never entered. My laboratory. If my son had wanted me dead, I would already be in the ground. That truth settled over me as I unlocked the door just after midnight. The lights hummed to life, illuminating copper stills, glass beakers, chromatography equipment, tools I hadn't used in years, not since I handed most operations to my executive team. But wine had been my language, long before it became my business. And poison, I was about to learn, spoke a language too. I removed my jacket and cut a small square from the wine-stained sleeve. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from rage. I sealed the fabric into a vial and began running solvent extraction, my movements automatic muscle memory guiding me while my mind replayed the footage again and again. Daniel's face. That smile. The laughter. An hour passed, then another. When the chromatography results printed, I stared at the page until the numbers stopped blurring. There it was. Not one compound. Two. Clever, deliberate, cruel. The first agent was a zinc-binding compound, one that slowly flushed zinc from the bloodstream. Zinc deficiency doesn't announce itself loudly. It erodes you, taste fades, smell disappears, balance weakens. Doctors call it aging, degeneration, something to accept gracefully. The second compound was worse. A sulfite receptor blocker, industrial grade, never approved for human use. It specifically disrupted the receptors responsible for detecting complex flavor compounds. Wine. My life's work. Daniel hadn't, just wanted me out of the way. He wanted me humiliated. Broken. Convinced I no longer deserved the throne I'd built. My breath caught as I read the final line of the report. Temporary exposure, fully reversible. I laughed then. A short, sharp sound that echoed off the stone walls. He didn't want me dead. He wanted me desperate. I drove back to the main house just before dawn. Daniel and Clara had returned to their city apartment after dinner, leaving the estate quiet. I moved through my kitchen slowly, opening cabinets, drawers, shelves I hadn't checked in months. That's when I found the vitamins. The same ones Daniel had insisted I take every morning. Doctor approved, he'd said, beaming. I just want you healthy, Mom. I peeled back the cheerful label. Underneath, printed in harsh industrial ink, were words that made my blood run cold. Not for human consumption. Property of VINTX Industrial LABS. My knees weakened, not from poison, but from the realization that my son wasn't acting alone. In the bathroom trash, I found empty vials. In his old bedroom, tucked behind a false panel in the desk, I found invoices. Casino markers. Private lenders. Red-circled balances screaming desperation. $3.2 million in debt. Due in 3 months. 3 months. The same length of time my health had begun to fail. If I signed the power of attorney papers next week, Daniel would control assets worth over $100 million. Enough to erase every bad decision he'd ever made. Enough to justify poisoning his own mother. I sat at my late husband's desk as the sun rose, surrounded by proof of betrayal. His photograph sat nearby, Thomas Beaumont, the man who taught me to taste soil in wine and truth in people. I trusted him, I whispered. But trust, I realized, had nearly cost me everything. I reached for my phone and called the one person who had never failed me. Margaret Cross. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with concern. Eleanor, it's almost 6 in the morning. I need you at the estate, I said. Immediately, and you can't tell anyone. A pause. Then, I'm on my way. When I hung up, I looked once more at the lab reports spread across the desk. Daniel thought he was winning. He thought I was fatting. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would not confront him. I would not warn him. I would let him believe the poison was working. Because if my son wanted me weak and dying, I would give him the performance of a lifetime. By morning, I had a plan, but what I overheard next would reveal that Daniel wasn't just stealing my company. He was preparing to destroy it forever. By the time Margaret arrived, the sun was already stretching over the vineyard, lighting the rows of vines in soft gold. From a distance, Beaumont Estate looked peaceful, timeless. Inside, it was a battlefield. Margaret didn't waste time with questions. She took one look at the lab reports spread across my desk, the stripped labels from the vitamins, and the empty vials lined up like evidence in a trial, and her face hardened. How long? She asked. 6 months, I said. Maybe longer. She exhaled slowly. You're lucky to be alive. I'm lucky he didn't want me dead. Margaret was more than my attorney. She helped me build Beaumont Vineyards from a regional producer into a global luxury brand. She knew my weaknesses. More importantly, she knew my enemies. And what are you going to do? She asked. I straightened my shoulders. Exactly what Daniel expects. That afternoon, I called my son. I made my voice sound thin, fractured. I let silence linger too long before speaking. Daniel, I whispered, I can't wait until next week. I woke up today and couldn't smell my coffee at all. There it was, the sharp intake of breath he tried to hide. Mom, he said carefully, are you sure you're okay? I'm not, I replied. I think it's getting worse. Muffled voices in the background. Clara, no doubt, whispering strategy. Then Daniel returned, his tone softened with barely concealed excitement. I'll come today. We'll bring the papers. It's time you rest. When the call ended, Margaret stared at me. You just handed him exactly what he wanted. No, I said. I invited him to expose himself. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Daniel looked immaculate, tailored suit, polished shoes, the picture of a man ready to inherit an empire. Clara carried a small bakery box, her smile tight and practiced. I brought something sweet, she said. Chocolate, your favorite. I leaned closer, sniffed and recoiled. That smells wrong, I muttered. Like chemicals. Daniel's hand landed on my shoulder. Mom, your senses are confused. Please, let's get this over with. He laid the documents on the table, power of attorney, control clauses, legal seals crisp and final. 40 years of work reduced to a few signatures. I reached for the pen. My hand shook. I knocked over the water carafe. Liquid spilled across the pages, ink bleeding, seals dissolving. Daniel lunged, too late. It's fine, he said through clenched teeth. We'll print new ones. Friday, I said, feigning confusion. At the board meeting, I want witnesses. I don't want anyone thinking you forced me. He hesitated, then nodded. They left soon after. That night, I began the second phase. I played the role perfectly. I shuffled when Daniel visited, missed obvious labels, claimed I couldn't smell the roses lining the walkway. I drank zinc supplements in secret, detoxed my system slowly, carefully. By Monday, bitterness returned to my coffee. By Tuesday, the oak barrels smelled like home again. Daniel didn't notice. Greed had made him careless. On Wednesday afternoon, I sat near the garden doors, pretending to nap. Daniel paced outside, phone pressed to his ear. "Friday night," he said. "The tankers roll in, flush everything." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Every barrel," he continued. "Every bottle. We turn it into base liquid. Nobody needs to know we dumped 30 million in vintage." He laughed. "She's signing Friday morning. After that, it's mine." That was when I understood. Daniel wasn't just stealing Beaumont Vineyards. He was planning to erase it. That night, I made a call that would empty my cellars and set a trap my son would walk into without hesitation. I didn't sleep after Daniel's phone call. I sat in the dark of my study, staring at the vineyard through the window, watching the moon drift slowly over rows of vines my family had tended for generations. He wasn't just planning to take my company. He was going to destroy it. Flush it into drains, strip its name, turn 40 years of patience, craft, and integrity into industrial sludge. And he thought I'd be too weak to notice. Just before midnight, Margaret returned, this time with 3 trucks and 4 people I trusted with my life. No one spoke as the refrigerated trailers backed quietly toward the cellar entrance. Headlights stayed off. Engines barely murmured. It felt less like a business operation and more like a rescue mission. We worked fast, bottle by bottle, case by case. The cellar was cold and sacred, the air thick with oak, stone, and history. Every label was a memory. Every cork sealed a year of my life. The 1981 Reserve, my first international award. The 1994 Blend, created the year Thomas died. The 2003 Vintage, harvested during the drought that nearly broke us. My hands lingered on one bottle longer than the rest. 1989. The year Daniel was born. I'd made only 20 cases, saved them for moments I thought would matter: his wedding, his first child, the day he took over with pride. I slipped one bottle into a padded crate and closed the lid. "Save it," Margaret said softly, "for someone worthy." By dawn, the cellar looked unchanged. But it was a lie. Every bottle Daniel planned to destroy was gone, replaced with weighted decoys filled with tinted water and synthetic scent. To an untrained eye, it was perfect. By 6 a.m., the trucks disappeared into the fog. I showered, dressed, and stood before the mirror. The woman staring back looked different now, steadier, awake. I chose my black suit, the one I wore when I buried my husband. Some endings deserve respect. At 9 a.m., I walked into the boardroom. Daniel was already there, confident, smiling. He thought this meeting would crown him. I sat at the head of the table and met his gaze. "Shall we begin?" I asked. He nodded. And that was when I poured the first glass. But the second glass would expose a secret neither my son nor his powerful partner ever expected to face. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, bright and indifferent to what was about to unfold inside. Around the table sat the people who would decide the future of Beaumont Vineyards: executives, legal counsel, financial officers. Faces trained to read balance sheets, not betrayal. Daniel sat 2 seats to my right. He wouldn't look at me. Not because he felt guilty, but because he was afraid that if he did, he might see something he didn't expect. Strength. "Before we sign," I said calmly, placing my briefcase on the table, "I'd like to observe a family tradition." A few brows lifted. Daniel stiffened. "My father believed no partnership should begin without wine," I continued. "It's how we honored trust at Beaumont." I removed 2 crystal decanters and set them on the table. "One contains a 2018 reserve," I said. The other contains something different. I poured the first glass and slid it toward the legal counsel. She leaned in, sniffed. Blackberry, oak, earth. Nods followed around the table. Professionals, competence. Then I reached for the second decanter. The room felt suddenly very still. I poured a glass and slid it toward Daniel. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Enough. What do you smell? I asked. He lifted the glass, inhaled, and spoke too quickly. Cherry, maybe spice. I smiled. Interesting, I said, because that glass contains industrial zinc binding compounds and a sulfite receptor blocker. Silence slammed into the room. Daniel's face drained of color. I turned to the others. For 6 months, I've been ingesting it unknowingly. It strips taste, smell, balance. Doctors call it aging. My son called it opportunity. A chair scraped back. Someone swore under their breath. That's absurd, Daniel stammered. She's confused. I opened my briefcase and laid the lab reports on the table. Dates, numbers, decline. Proof. This was never meant to kill me, I said softly. It was meant to break me. The door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a detective I'd known for 20 years. Daniel stood abruptly. You can't. Yes, the detective said, pulling out handcuffs. We can. The cuffs clicked. Daniel collapsed into his chair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Mom, he whispered. I didn't answer. As they led him away, the boardroom remained frozen. No applause, no victory. Just truth. And a silence that tasted sharper than any wine. But justice wasn't the end of the story, because the real question still remained. What do you do after your own child tries to erase you? When the boardroom finally emptied, I stayed behind. The city stretched beneath the windows, indifferent and endless. Cars moved like ants. Lives continued as if nothing monumental had just happened. My son had been taken away in handcuffs, exposed before the people he'd tried to impress, stripped of the future he thought he'd stolen. And yet my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From grief. Margaret returned quietly and closed the door behind her. You did exactly what you had to do, she said. I know, I replied. That doesn't make it easier. She didn't argue. She understood that justice and peace were not the same thing. By afternoon, the news began to spread, quietly at first. A few urgent calls from board members, then frantic messages from investors. By evening, headlines were forming. Conspiracy, attempted poisoning, corporate fraud. The Beaumont name was everywhere. But for the first time in months, my senses were clear. I tasted my coffee that night, rich, bitter, real. I stood in my kitchen and cried over a mug like it was a miracle. Daniel's betrayal had hollowed me out, but it hadn't destroyed me. Weeks passed. The trial moved quickly. Evidence was overwhelming. The lab reports, the security footage, the financial trail. Clara took a plea deal and vanished from my life without a goodbye. Daniel received a sentence that felt both too heavy and not heavy enough. 7 years. When the gavel fell, he didn't look at me. I wasn't sure I could have survived it if he had. Spring returned to the vineyard slowly, the way healing always does. One vine at a time, one morning at a time. I walked the rows daily, touching leaves, inhaling the scent of earth and growth, reminding myself that not everything meant to live must come from blood. That was when Hannah came back. She stood at the edge of the vineyard, hands folded nervously, as if unsure she still belonged in my world. You saved my life, I told her. She shook her head. You saved your own. I smiled because she was right. Together we tasted the future, new blends, honest wine, no shortcuts. I watched her listen to the grapes the way my father once taught me, with patience, with reverence. Legacy, I realized, was an inheritance. It was intention. But even as peace settled into my bones, one bottle remained untouched in my cellar, the 1989 vintage. The year Daniel was born. And one question still haunted me. Could something born of love still hold meaning, even after betrayal? The answer came on a quiet morning in the vineyard, when I finally decided what to do with the wine I had saved for my son. The cellar was silent in a way that felt almost sacred. Stone walls held the cool air steady, the faint scent of oak and thyme wrapping around me as I stood before the rack I'd avoided for months. Every other bottle had found its place again, catalogued, protected, waiting for the right moment. All except one. 1989. I ran my fingers over the label, its edges softened by age. This wine had been born the same year as my son. I'd made it with shaking hands and impossible hope, convinced the future would be kind. I lifted the bottle carefully, like it might shatter under the weight of memory. Behind me, Hannah waited without speaking. "This was meant for Daniel," I said at last. "I saved it for his milestones." She nodded, her eyes gentle. She never tried to replace him, never pretended to. "I don't know if I should open it," I continued, "or keep it sealed forever." Hannah met my gaze. "Wine isn't meant to be trapped," she said softly. "Neither are you." Her words settled into me. We carried the bottle outside, into the vineyard where the morning sun spilled gold across the rows. I opened it the way my father taught me, slow, deliberate, respectful. The cork released with a quiet sigh. I poured 2 glasses. The aroma rose immediately. Black cherry leather earth, something tender beneath it all. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. My senses were whole again. Hannah tasted it first. Her expression changed instantly, surprise, then awe. "It's honest," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "That's what makes it rare." I lifted my glass and let the wine touch my lips. For the first time in a year, the taste didn't carry bitterness or regret. It carried truth. "I thought legacy was about blood," I said. "About who inherits your name." Hannah waited. "But legacy is really about who protects what matters when it's vulnerable," I continued. "Who shows up when it's easier to walk away?" I placed the bottle in her hands. "This estate will be yours someday." Her breath caught. "Eleanor, You understand this place," I said, "and you didn't have to poison anyone to earn it." Tears filled her eyes. The vineyard stretched endlessly around us, alive and patient, unconcerned with human betrayal. Life moved forward. And so would I. But the final lesson of this story wasn't about revenge or inheritance. It was about the warning I nearly learned too late. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment you discover it. They're wrong. The hardest part comes after, when the danger has passed, the noise has faded, and you're left alone with the question of how you didn't see it sooner. Months later, the vineyard was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that invites reflection whether you want it or not. I spent more time walking the rows than managing meetings, letting the rhythm of the land pull me back into myself. My health had fully returned. Taste came first, then smell, then balance. Each sense felt like a gift I'd almost lost forever. The doctors called it remarkable recovery. I called it mercy. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the property where the vines met open land and thought about how close I'd come to disappearing, not just physically, but spiritually, to becoming a footnote in my own story. Daniel had wanted my signature. But what he'd really wanted was my surrender. I replayed small moments in my mind, the way he'd rushed me through conversations, how he'd spoken for me instead of to me, how concern had slowly replaced respect. The warning signs had been there, dressed up as care. Love can be the most convincing disguise. Hannah joined me, carrying a notebook filled with harvest notes. She'd taken ownership of her role with quiet seriousness, never asking for credit, never pushing for recognition. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I replied, "but I won't forget what it cost." That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel. To myself. I wrote about the danger of confusing familiarity with loyalty, about how power attracts not just admiration, but hunger, about how age doesn't make you weak, silence does. The letter ended with a promise. I will never again shrink to make someone else comfortable. The next morning, I recorded my story. Not for the press, not for sympathy. For anyone who might be standing where I once stood, trusting blindly, dismissing instincts, mistaking shared blood for shared values. If my voice could stop even one person from surrendering their life's work to someone who didn't deserve it, then the pain would have meaning. The vineyard taught me patience. Betrayal taught me vigilance. And survival taught me something even deeper. A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you protect while you're still here. And if you think this story ends quietly, you haven't heard the final truth I need to tell you. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. The most dangerous poison is rarely the one you can taste. It's the one served to you slowly, lovingly, by someone who knows exactly where you're vulnerable. I used to believe that building something lasting meant working harder, trusting deeper, forgiving faster. That love, especially family love, should never be questioned. I thought suspicion was the enemy of harmony. I was wrong. Harmony without boundaries is an invitation to be erased. I look back now at the woman I was 6 months before the restaurant, the one apologizing for taking up space, the one letting others speak on her behalf, the one mistaking decline for destiny. That woman wasn't weak. She was conditioned. Conditioned to step aside. Conditioned to doubt her instincts. Conditioned to believe that sacrifice was the same as virtue. But survival has a way of stripping illusions down to their bones. When Daniel poisoned me, he didn't just attack my body. He attacked my authority, my confidence, my right to exist at the center of my own life. And for a while, he succeeded. Until the moment I stopped explaining myself. Until I chose clarity over comfort. Today, Beaumont Vineyard stands stronger than ever, not because of revenge, not because of scandal, but because it is finally honest again. No hidden agendas, no diluted values, no silence mistaken for peace. Hannah now walks the vineyard with the same reverence my father once did. She listens. She waits. She respects the process. And when she speaks, people listen, not because she demands it, but because she has earned it. That is the legacy I choose to pass on. Not money. Not a name. But a warning. If someone pressures you to hurry decisions that took you a lifetime to build, pause. If concern feels like control, question it. If love requires you to disappear, walk away. I nearly lost everything because I believed trust meant never looking twice. It doesn't. Trust means believing someone is who they show themselves to be, even when it hurts. So this is my truth, offered without bitterness and without apology. Blood can betray you. Power attracts hunger. And silence is consent, unless you break it. I survived because I listened, when my instincts finally screamed louder than my fear. And if my story reached you today, maybe it's because you needed to hear this before it was too late. Because somewhere, right now, someone you trust is asking you to sign something, surrender something, or stay quiet, and that choice may define the rest of your life.